Hi, everyone. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today we have another article for you called Connections Through Reading.
好，我们的中文标题是郭怡慧，阅读带给我们的正能量。
Actually, the English title is not clear at all, so we're going to go through the article for you so you know what we're talking about. Please listen carefully. A teacher, lawyer, and writer, Michelle Guo has spent her life helping others. Her journey has involved teaching in rural Arkansas, advocating for children with special needs, and working as a lawyer for undocumented immigrants. Along the way, she has discovered that one of the best ways to relate to others is through the simple act of reading. In a TED Talk and in the book Reading with Patrick, Guo discusses how the written word, whether it was in the form of novels or poetry, helped her reconnect with a former student, Patrick, who was in prison. As a teacher, Guo had succeeded in getting Patrick to come out of his shell, and he had become interested in class and begun writing poems. Yet, years later, Guo was shocked at how much his learning and writing had regressed since she had last seen him. Guo began visiting Patrick in jail and brought him various books to read, including works by James Baldwin, C.S. Lewis, and Walt Whitman. These writings gave Guo and Patrick a way to connect, and soon they began trading favorite haiku poems and other poetry they had come across. While Guo acknowledges the limits of reading, it didn't and couldn't change the fundamental conditions of Patrick's life. She points out what it can provide. In the case of Patrick, Guo states that books brought back imagination and adventure to his inner life and gave him a way to be courageous. Perhaps most significantly, reading gave Patrick a way to connect with his young daughter. His revitalized love of books encouraged him to write to her. It also provided him new life lessons and sparked a passion for literature that he was eager to pass on to his own child.
Okay, so a lawyer, teacher, and writer, a teacher, lawyer, and writer. Sometimes it matters what order you list someone's qualifications in, and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, she's all three. She is a teacher, she is a lawyer, and she is a writer. All of these things are true about Michelle Guo. And she has spent her life helping others. Like all of three are helping professions, some more directly than others.
好，所以我们看到呢，这个Michelle Guo 有3个身份，他是个老师，他是个 lawyer， 是个律师，而且他还是个 writer， 他是个作家。那他呢 has spent her life， 他一辈子都用来干嘛呢 ？Helping others， 用来帮助别人。好 ，spent time 啊，包括 spent life doing something， 这是很常见的一个句型。所以这个地方 helping 有 ing。
Her journey has involved teaching in rural Arkansas, advocating for children with special needs, and working as a lawyer for undocumented immigrants. Oh, very busy here. Her journey, that means her path through life, the things that she has done in her life, involved or included teaching in rural Arkansas. Here's a good example of a redundant adjective. Arkansas is nothing but rural. It has really no cities at all. For a long time, it was almost 100% farmland. But it gives us the idea that she's been out in the sticks. She has been far away from any urban life, any city life, and in areas where there is more poverty, less education, those sorts of areas where rural areas in the United States and many countries are poorer than in the city. That's one thing she did. Another, advocating for children with special needs. If you're an advocate, you propose and try to cure or rather solve problems. Children with special needs are children who are born or develop problems physically or mentally, and so they need special teachers, they need special teaching equipment, and so on. They have special needs. 3, she worked as a lawyer for undocumented immigrants, people who entered the United States without the proper papers, say like a passport, and she wanted to help them to stay in the United States or get them out of jail or whatever their situation was.
好，所以他的 journey， 他一生的旅程 has involved 我们可以这里 involved 我们可以解释成为 included。他旅程包括了他做过的什么事情呢？首先 teaching 教书in rural Arkansas， 在这个阿肯色州的这个乡下教过书。好，那这个刚 Bruce 老师开玩笑，这阿肯色州基本上都是乡下，它不是一个非常有钱的一个州。那他也做过什么事情呢？advocating 在这里就是为什么发言争取什么什么或者支持某一个 cause 那所以他为谁发言争取权利呢？ Children with special needs 那些有特殊需求的孩子，他为他们发声争取权利。那同时 and 这个 involved working as a lawyer， 他也当过律师那这个帮谁争取呢？帮这些 undocumented immigrants undocumented 就是没有文件的，没有适当文件的那 immigrants 就是移民，所以其实 undocumented immigrants 指的就是非法移民因为你没有适当的文件你没有签证，可能没有护照，没有居留权等等的所以他为这些人也替他们发声。
And along the way, along this journey of her life, she has discovered that one of the best ways to relate to others, to have a relationship with others, is through the simple act of reading.
好 along the way 是一路上she has discovered that 她发现到 one of the best ways to 就你要做一件事情最好的方法做什么事情呢？要 relate to others。所以 relate to others 就是这个 form a connection with others 或者 to be connected with others 的意思这 relate 是这样用的有一点像产生共鸣或者是能够让跟别人能够有某种心灵上的交流之类的它也可以是 to understand or have sympathy for somebody 产生共鸣。所以像这个 relate to 所以例如你可以说 I can relate to your feelings 你想你的感受呢，我能够体会得到。好，所以他说你要能够跟别人心灵上有交流，能够跟别人能够建立那种这个共同的感觉，好，产生共鸣。最好的方法之一就是透过 the simple act of reading， 就是透过很简单的就是阅读的这个动作。
Okay, next paragraph. In a TED Talk and in the book Reading with Patrick, remember she is a writer, and she gave a TED Talk, and she talked about her book called Reading with Patrick. Notice the italics here. Guo discusses how the written word, whether it was in the form of novels or poetry, these two together are part of literature, which is the writing down of English to make a point, helped her reconnect with a former student, Patrick, who was in prison. The book that she wrote helped her to set up a dialogue, a conversation, or whether it was a written conversation or face-to-face conversation. She reconnected. She again established a relationship with a former student. His name is Patrick, and he was in prison. He was a prisoner.
好，所以我们可以看到说 in a TED Talk 在一个这个TED 的一个这个 talk 谈话里面，好，那这个字要注意它的重音是 a TED Talk， 好，不是 a TED Talk 这个我昨天才在捷运上又听到两个这个很用功的两个大学生在讨论两个人一直讲那个 TED Talk 好好听那个 TED Talk 好有意思 那个听起来就是中文哈，英文是念 TED Talk 哈，中音在 TED， 所以在一个 TED Talk 里面，还有 in the book 在这本书啊 Reading with Patrick 这本书里面，啊，这个郭他怎么样 discusses 他谈论了 how the written word 就是写下来的文字啊，就是形成书啊，通常就是现在来讲大概都是出版物哈。那 whether it was in the form of novels or poetry 哈，不管这个written word 是以小说的形式 in the form of novels， 或者是以 poetry 哈，以这个诗歌的形式出现，不管怎么样，反正 the written word 都可以帮忙他 reconnect with。 好，那刚刚这个 Bruce 讲这个他用英文解释很好， reconnect with 其实就有一个 dialogue 能够让人产生对话，跟一个 former student 产生的对话，一个以前的学生产生对话。那各位还要注意到这 reconnect 有一个 re， 所以这不是第一次跟这个学生有 connect 啊，所以之前已经 connect 过。那到底发生什么事情，我们等一下下面会看到。那他这一个 former student 名字叫做 Patrick 啊，一个同位格。然后呢，顺便接下来再告诉你 who was in prison， 他正在入狱服刑，他是一个囚犯。
As a teacher, Guo had succeeded in getting Patrick to come out of his shell. If you get someone to come out of their shell, it means originally they won't interact with people much. They'll just keep to themselves. And she got him to actually participate in class and to start actually engaging with the world. And he had also become interested in class, and he had begun writing poems. So in this sentence, we have a lot of past perfect constructions. And why are we suddenly in past perfect? It's to emphasize that this thing that happened in this sentence happened before. This is when she originally taught Patrick. And the article is mostly about her reconnection with Patrick when she got together with him again. But originally when she met him, it was as a teacher. And at the time she had succeeded in doing these things. He had become interested in class and he had begun writing poems. But when you use past perfect, it implies that maybe a change had happened. And so this is perfect also for the sentence because he had begun, but now he is no longer doing it, is what's implied.
好，所以呢，我们先解释这个句子的意思哈。他说，身为一个老师呢，郭他had succeeded in 啊，他成功的做到了什么事情啊 ？had succeeded in 啊，让这个 getting Patrick to come out of his shell。好 ，to come out of his shell， 感觉起来就意思上了，就是卸下心防的意思，开始跟人互动啊，开始这个参与这个世界的事情啊 ，to become less shy 啊 ，and more willing to talk to others， 或者是 to interact with others， 所以他让这个那 get 一样，他的受词是 Patrick 啊，让这个 Patrick 能够卸下他的心防。那 and he had become interested in class， 那这个学生也变得对于课堂比较有兴趣，而且呢，他 had begun 啊，这个 writing poems 开始写诗了。那接下来就是刚刚 Angel 老师提醒各位的，就是我们这个句子里面看到很多的过去完成式。那过去完成式，各位一定要记得一个很重要的概念，过去完成式不会单独存在，它一定是跟另外一个过去式产生比较。它要告诉你两件过去的事情，有一个先发生，有一个后发生。那个先发生的就要用过去完成式。好，一定是两个过去的事情产生比较才会有过去完成式。因为如果你不比较的话，任何发生在过去的事情都是简单过去式。所以这个地方他用 had 的原因是因为他最早曾经跟这个学生 connect 啊，然后教他这个欣赏文学，教他写诗，可是后来又发生了什么事情，他们又断掉联系，后来又再一次的他又让这学生跟这学生 reconnect， 所以这个是过去的过去最早发生的事情，所以用过去完成式。
And the next sentence proves that. Yet, years later, after the time we just talked about, Guo was shocked at how much his learning, Patrick's learning and writing, had regressed, gone downhill, gotten worse since she had last seen him. So this is a perfect example of what Angela and Wesley were just talking about the past perfect. Years later is still in the past tense, but earlier than that was the sentence before that.
好，所以我们在这里看到他说 years later， 这还是在过去的事情。好，他说好几年后，但是这个好几年后 仍然是在过去。所以我们刚刚讲到，在这好几年后之前所发生的事情，那是过去的过去，叫做过去完成。所以好几年之后呢，郭 was shocked at， 他很惊讶的发现 how much his learning and writing， 就是 Patrick 他的学习还有他的写作能力 had regressed， 退步了。那 GRE 就是 walk， 这个字根是 walk 的意思，所以 progress PRO 是 forward， 所以 progress 是往前，那是进步。那 regress RE 是 back 或是 again， 就是往后走，就是退步了。你这样子记的话，这两个字一下就全部都记起来。progress 相反就是 regress， 因为 PRO forward RE 是 back。好，所以他退步了。为什么？从什么时候开始算起来他退步呢？从他 had last seen him， 他最后一次见到 Patrick 之后，有一段时间没联络了，然后后来又发现到说，Patrick 现在突然之间他的 writing 他的 learning 都退步了。
Now, Guo began visiting Patrick in jail when she realized this thing about Patrick, and she brought him various books to read, including works by James Baldwin, a famous black author, C.S. Lewis, a famous British fantasy writer, and Walt Whitman, who is a famous American poet.
好，然后呢，他知道这件事情之后，他就开始began visiting， 他开始去探望 Patrick in jail， 去监狱探望他，然后呢，带给他不同的书 various books 那 to read 这表示这个书的目的是要让他阅读的所以 to read 是一个不定词片语，修饰那个 books。好，那他带的书包括怎么样？这底下这几位作家这里面的都很有名的作家那这些作品带给他看。
These writings from the previous three authors gave Guo and Patrick a way to connect. It gave them something to talk about that they could share in common. And soon they began trading favorite haiku poems. After their discussion of novels and poetry, they also read some Japanese poetry. Haiku, I don't know how to say that in Japanese, are specially constructed poems, and everyone has their favorite books or poems and so on. Trading, hey, did you read this? And the other person may say, no, I haven't, thank you. Have you read this one? You trade them, whether they're haiku poems or other poetry that they had come across, that they had happened to read.
好，所以 these writings 这些这个作品呢，给这个 Patrick gave Patrick 跟这个郭呢 a way to connect 让他们能够再度的产生互动那所以这个就是一开始讲的那个 reconnect 因为他们之前曾经 connect 过一次，那后来呢这个Patrick 退步了，那他又开始这个所以这个郭就到监狱去探望他，那这一次又 connect 了一次，所以 reconnect。然后很快的他们开始 trading， 就是 exchanging 他们开始交换他们最喜欢的一些这个 haiku poems， 就是我们中文的排句那个排句它是非常注重音律讲求这个字句对仗很工整的一种文体这个尤其是日本的这个排句非常的发达好，所以他们就最喜欢这个排句的诗，他们会交换，还有其他的 poetry they had come across， 他们遇到的读到的一些他们认为好的诗，他们就彼此交换的。好 come across 就是巧遇了meet or find by chance。
Well, Guo acknowledges the limits of reading. She understands that reading wasn't a cure-all for everything. For instance, it didn't and couldn't change the fundamental conditions of Patrick's life. It didn't change anything that he's reading. He's still in prison. He still has all of the consequences of how he lived his life coming down on him. And it couldn't change these circumstances. Of course, reading books is not going to change the fact that he's in prison. So, she knows that there's a limit to it, but she points out what it can provide. She points out what reading can do for something. It can't change the material conditions of your life, but it can change something.
好，这个 acknowledge 类似我们讲的不否认它的语气跟不否认很接近。好，所以是 accept or admit the existence or truth of something。所以郭他不否认 the limits of reading， 就是阅读其实是有它的局限性的。好，什么叫局限性？阅读 didn't 并没有 and couldn't 也没办法 change 改变 the fundamental conditions of Patrick's life， 他没有办法改变 Patrick 他的生活他的人生的一些 基本的事实或基本的状况。conditions 可以说是个状况，那 fundamental 就是最基本的也就是说他犯了罪了，他现在关在监狱里面，你不能跟他讲说你读一读书之后呢你明天就可以回家了不可能而且他做的事情他必须还是要为他做的事情负责，那读书没有办法改变这些事实所以郭他承认，他不否认这读书是有局限性的，但是他 points out 他指出了 what it can provide 这个读书可以提供什么，他没有办法改变一些 fundamental conditions of Patrick's life， 但是他还是可以提供一些东西。
Okay, as they both just said, what it can provide, and now that leads us right into what it can provide. In the case of Patrick, Gore states that books brought back imagination and adventure to his inner life. Being in prison, you might dream about a lot of things, but it's not a fine type of imagination and adventure. In prison, you are very, very limited physically, but through reading, you can imagine that you're on some kind of adventure with other people, learning new things, going new places. That can happen to anybody who reads, and gave him a way to be courageous. Reading may have made him a stronger man inside because he realized, hey, I'm in prison and this is the end of the line, but still I can use my mind to dream of or construct ideas or adventures of the mind.
好，我们看到这里，他说 In the case of Patrick 就 Patrick 这个例子来讲呢郭 states that 那他说明state 就是很清楚的表示他说呢，他表示呢 books 书 brought back 带回了 imagination and adventure 带回了想象，带回了冒险 to his inner life 对于这个Patrick 他内在的生活，内在的世界那读书为他内在的生活带来了这个想象跟冒险因为他外在的生活就是被关起来了嘛，但是他内在的内心世界他可以去想象，可以去探险。然后呢 gave him a way 给 Patrick 一个方法，让他可以 be courageous 让他能够有勇气那勇气很重要，尤其是你关在监狱里面，你很容易就灰心丧志，你可能就自暴自弃，但是你要有勇气你才有办法做好，我决定要改变，我将来一定要做一个更好的人。
Perhaps most significantly, perhaps the most meaningful thing was that reading gave Patrick a way to connect with his young daughter. So because he was reading, he was able to create a relationship with his daughter despite being in jail, and that is a very meaningful thing.
Significant 就是值得我们注意重要到或者是这个大到值得我们注意，所以这个也许最重要的一点在这里意思perhaps most significantly 也许最重要的是阅读给 Patrick 一个方法，可以 connect with his young daughter 可以跟他的这个年轻的女儿能够 connect 能够有互动那这个当然很重要，这跟亲子之间有关系。
His revitalized love of books, remember that he had been a student and interested in class and reading and even writing, then he had years where he didn't and he regressed, but now again Goa helped him to revitalize, to give life again, to breathe, we say, to breathe life back into his love of books. That encouraged him to write to her, not to Goa Lao Si, but to his daughter.
好，那 revitalized 就是这个重新注入活力，或者重新注入生命力，重新有了生命力，重新有了活力的意思所以他对于这个书本的爱是重新获得的，重新得到了对这个书本的爱使得他 encouraged him 鼓励他来 write to her 就是这个写信给 her 在这里指的应该是他的 daughter.
It also provided him new life lessons. It allowed him to continue learning things, which is honestly, I think, what makes us human beings is to continue to learn things. If you stop learning, you stop kind of being human, I feel. So he learned these new things, and he sparked a passion for literature that he was eager to pass on to his own child. He was eager to also help his child develop a passion for literature.
那阅读啊，或者是这个书写，也 provided him 给他怎么样？好，后面省略了一个 with 啊，给他 new life lessons 一些新的生命的体验。然后呢 ，sparked 就是 ignite 啊 ，ignited 啊 ，I-G-N-I-T-E 啊，点燃了一个 passion 热情 for literature， 点燃了他对文学的热情。好 ，that 就是指这个热情。He was eager to 啊，他迫不及待的想要把对于文学的热情能够 pass on。能够传承下去啊 ，pass on 就是传承下去，那个 on 有持续的意思，传承下去，传给谁呢 ？To his own child， 传承给他自己的孩子。
That's it for today's lesson. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something from it. Till tomorrow, we'll be back.